Hey guys, Ryan from the Mavericks, mavericks.goldenandsons.com. This is podcast episode 43. And today, we're talking about the difference between a full-time job and entrepreneurship. So a couple of days ago, I went to the bank, and as I was talking to the bank about setting up my Profit First accounts, the administrator was asking me, what's the difference, Ryan, between starting a business or entrepreneurship? No, that's not the question he asked. Actually, what he asked was, how's your business going? Anyway, it got into that whole conversation about what's the difference between full-time jobs and entrepreneurship. And I said, I don't think there is a difference. You see, when you get into a full-time job, you start off in a specific field, right? A specific level of expertise. You might be spreadsheets, you might be baking. It might be front desk. And when you start a business, you start off in a certain level of expertise or a certain area of expertise. So you might, if you start a bakery, you'll start off as a baker. Or if you start off as a barber shop, you'll start off as a barber. So you start off at a certain level of expertise. And in the full-time job, your onboarding is a little less onerous, right? All the setup, all the business administration is already done for you by the company. But when you start your own business, you got to do your own business administration, right? You got to get your own licenses, your own permits, your own zoning certificate, and all that kind of stuff. So it's true. There's a little bit more to figure out when you're starting a business, but the workload involved is not that different. All right. But then what ends up happening is, as you climb up the ladder in the business, in the business that you're working on, your full-time job, you start cross-training in different departments to get more skilled in marketing and finance and legal and administration and cash flow statements and talent management, etc. And you start climbing. As you have to climb up the ladder, or as you climb up the ladder, you have to get skilled in all these different departments. The same thing happens with business, right? With entrepreneurship. As you build out your business, you have to get more and more skilled in all the different areas of your business in order to get to higher and higher levels of leadership. So if there's really a negligible material difference between a full-time job and entrepreneurship, why do most people not go into entrepreneurship? And it's because of the mental game. The real difference between entrepreneurship and a full-time job is what's in the mind. You see, like a full-time job, you have security. And from that security stems your creativity or your boredom. So you have this job, in certain companies, they will run you until you are stressed and overloaded and you'll burn out and you'll need to take your vacations. You'll need to have to use sick days. You'll need to defer to your sick days. In other jobs, you might actually have a lot of open-endedness to be creative and come up with new solutions. This is a lot of what the programmer life is like. So you have these two options, right? Where from a sense of security, you can either get boredom or you can get creativity. And the companies that can foster creativity on a recurring basis actually become innovative and start to lead the industry and lead the pack in terms of their returns in the stock market. But the companies that do not, that always lend towards burnout or tend towards a turnover or attrition in their workforce, they're the ones that fizzle out and die, right? It's seen throughout history. When you start your own business, there is no sense of security. So now the question is, the same two results, are they still there? Do you still get burnout or do you still get creativity? The answer is yes. From the lack of security, you still have those two options, burnout and creativity. The problem is that when you start your own business, the tendency is for burnout. We don't tend to be creative or happy or joyful when our money's on the line, right? If you had a full-time job where for every mistake they docked a certain percentage of that mistake or the full amount of that mistake from your pay, would you be creative? Most people who get full-time jobs, who are looking for a sense of security, would not be creative. And that's where the sense of lack of innovation will come from. As long as their employment, like the dollars coming in, are tied to their security, they won't be creative. But if their security is secured, right? Like if they're going to get a steady paycheck and they know the work is coming in, then they can be creative, they can propose new ideas. A lot of companies like Google and Facebook and all the tech companies in Silicon Valley grow because they give their employees a sense of security. In fact, when they do the venture capital funding, they're trying to raise enough capital to hire the best talent possible and then give them a sense of security that allows them to be creative. You know, this is why universities pay for research projects to be done at universities. Because, sorry, not universities. This is why businesses pay universities to have a lot of research projects done there. Because they can have the students who are actually paying to be there, who are earning or working towards their PhDs or their master's degrees or their internships and co-ops. They can use that motivation to employ them in research projects to make new discoveries, because there's a sense of security in the fact that you put in money into something and now you're there for it, right? Like that's what education does. And now you're there for it to get your education and your credentials in return. And as a result, they can use that sense of security to foster innovation in the research field, which then lends to them being like, top of the pack, because they can take those innovations and apply it to their business and make it commercially viable, right? So that's why a lot of companies fund universities. But the key here is that in business, when you start your own business, the question is, yes, you have a tendency towards burnout, but will you choose to still be creative? It is the great leaders in business, or it is, I would say actually, the people who actually become great leaders in business are the ones that can be creative in the midst of the lack of security that their new business enterprise presents to them. Did I hit you with that? Does that make sense? I'm not sure if the impact of that message came through, but the difference between a full-time job and entrepreneurship is in the mind. You can either be in burnout or creative if you have a full-time job, or you can burn out and be creative if you don't have a full-time job and you're working as an entrepreneur. The difference is that in one you have security, in the other you do not. And now you have to make the willful decision to be creative in the midst of the lack of security. And that is a very difficult ask, right? So that's really the only difference between entrepreneurship and a full-time job. Will you choose to be creative? And when you start becoming creative, right? And you start to find that your sense of security is coming from like a belief in yourself that this will all work, right? You have to go deeper. Like some people, when they look for their sense of security, they look for it in money. Your sense of security in entrepreneurship needs to come from yourself. It needs to come deeper. It needs to come from the inside, saying that I know somehow I will get this answer and it will work. That's where the sense of security needs to come from. So okay, let me say this another way. In a full-time job, you have a sense of security that leads to burnout or creativity. In entrepreneurship, there is also a sense of security that either leads to burnout or creativity. But the sense of securities are different. The foundations of the security is different. The security in a full-time job comes from money. The security from entrepreneurship comes from yourself. It has to come from the inside. I'd mentioned to you this before about my grandfather. I think I mentioned my grandfather's story, how I do a lot of what I do for my grandfather in remembrance of my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, who struggled. He had 3 businesses. All 3 businesses failed. He ultimately worked for someone else, and at the age of 47 died of a brain aneurysm. And I always wondered what would it have been like to be held by him, right? Because I see my dad holding my son, and it's a beautiful thing to behold, right? So I always imagine what it would be like to talk to my grandfather and spend time with him. And so when I asked my dad, why did Tata fail in those businesses? Why did those businesses struggle? And my dad would try to say, in one business he had this issue, or another business he had this issue, in another business he had this issue. And one day I remember sitting at the breakfast table with my dad, and I was super stressed out about the barbershop because it wasn't working out at the time. It was in the middle of COVID. And my dad said, I wonder if this is how my dad felt that whole time. So my grandfather was the father of 7 kids. He was an entrepreneur. He had a struggling business. He was Indian, and so he was evaluated by his income. His status as a person, as a man, was evaluated by how much money he generated in his business. And because he didn't generate money, my dad had wondered how that had impacted him. And maybe, I wonder if that would have led to his brain aneurysm. And so the question is, my grandfather, was there a way that he could have succeeded? And the answer is yes. Yes, I do believe there was a way he could have succeeded. And I believe that way was if he stuck long enough with one of the businesses. I think most people, they they quit. Okay, remember I talked to you about the landing of understanding? So they start at the bottom of the mountain, they get to the landing, but really they think it's a valley. So they think it's a valley of despair. And so the despair starts overriding their decision. But really what happens is you climb this mountain, you get to the landing. And in that landing of understanding, you understand how high the mountain really is. But you also understand how far you've gone. And so from a place of wisdom, you can now say, is this climb worth the outcome that I am trying to gun for? The greater number of sacrifices that I'm asked of, is the end result worth all those sacrifices? You can ask that at the landing of understanding. And most people at the landing of understanding make the decision that the sacrifices that are further needed to achieve their dreams, like you thought the peak was there and you realize it's like 10 times longer, you start to make the decision that maybe this is not worth it, and so people climb back down. The problem is most people make the mistake of thinking that if they climb back down the mountain, they can climb back up the mountain through a faster path. And that plays out in the fact that they, close their business and start another business. Or they get bored of their current business because the progress is too slow, so they start again in another business. Here's the problem. You undo the effort of the work that you put in and the knowledge that you built over that period of the first climb to the landing of understanding. And so now you have to climb back down, learn a new industry, learn the new dynamics of your business, and climb back up. And guess where you're going to hit? You're going to hit another landing of understanding at around the same point that the first one was at. And you're going to have to make a decision. Are the sacrifices that are yet asked of you, is the outcome worth the sacrifices that you are about to incur? And if the answer is yes, actually most likely the answer will be no, because at the last time you were at the landing of understanding, you might have said no. Most people quit at the landing of understanding either because they are in despair, because they think they're in the valley of despair, but really they're at the landing of understanding. But they quit because they are in despair, or they quit because they think there's another path through to the top of the mountain. And there's no faster path to the top of the mountain. It literally is brute force to the top of the mountain. Okay? And so now you get to the landing of understanding. How do you continue this climb to the top of the mountain? Because at this point, your sense of security is gone. There is no sense of security. You've lost all that money on the climb. That's actually why you got to the landing of understanding. The money has impacted you. The cash flow has impacted you. You see all the red numbers every month or every week. You see that you haven't been paid. And you ask yourself, is this worth it? Do I have to go? I told my wife it would take 9 months. This might take 9 years. I told my family I'll be away for 3 years. This might take 30. Is that climb worth it? And now the change has to happen. Is your sense of security going to come from the money? Or is it going to come from you? Is the sense of security going to come from inside you? And if the sense of security comes from inside you, that's where the creativity will stem. That's where the innovation will come from. And then you'll continue to climb up the mountain. Every entrepreneur who has failed in their business, maybe this is an overgeneralization, and maybe I'm a junior entrepreneur. Okay. But I'll say this. I think they all quit because they all gave up too early. All their businesses could have succeeded had they stuck it out long enough. I don't think that there's any endeavor where a person has stuck it out long enough that has not seen success. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there can be 1,000 comments saying that I'm wrong. But I think all the failures of small businesses stem from the fact that that the people decide that it's not worth sticking out. And so they do not get a sense of assuredness from themselves, a sense of security from themselves, that they can put more money into this, they can sacrifice more for this, so that they can get the outcome they're looking for. Right? So that's the difference between a full-time job and an entrepreneurship life. Both need security, and both options will lead to burnout or creativity. Right? In jobs that lead to burnout, it's usually designed that way, and in jobs that lead to creativity, it's usually designed that way. But in entrepreneurship, if it leads to burnout, it's because your creativity, it's because you don't have a sense of security. Your sense of security is coming from money. If your sense of security is coming from money, you're going to lead to burnout. And if your sense of security comes from yourself, it's going to lead to creativity. And then you'll become more innovative. You'll find more ways to make your business work. You will continue to climb that mountain. You'll go from the landing of understanding. You'll be like, you know what? I'm going to keep going. climb, and you climb and climb. You get to the next landing of understanding. You realize the mountain is still yet longer, but now you're all the more wiser. So you keep climbing. And that's how you get to your results. That's how you get to your goals. That's the difference between a full-time job and entrepreneurship. In entrepreneurship, the security has to come from yourself to be creative, to climb to the top of the mountain. And the rest of the world will get their jobs from you because they just want the security from the money. That may have come across badly, but that's not what I meant. But you know what I'm trying to say. Most people want security from money. Not many people want security from themselves. If you're an entrepreneur, you get security from yourself. All right? And you're worth it. You can do it. This is Ryan from the Mavericks. Mavericks.goldwinandsons.com. If you want to join us, head over to the website. You'll see the link right after this video. I'll see you there. You take care.